Bonjour tout le monde, bonjour toutes mes amis. Bienvenue ici à la territoire ancestral de mes peuples nations algonquins. I'm very honored to welcome each and every one of you beautiful people to this unsurrendered homeland of the Algonquin people. Chimigwech Kibijano Manongum. Thank you for being here. I acknowledge the ancestral territories of all the Indigenous peoples in Canada, no matter where we are situated right now for this celebration of equal voices. So thank you. We bring honor and greetings on behalf of the Algonquin Nation. And it is also customary and as well as part of our law that when we bring greetings and welcome visitors into our homeland, we must always acknowledge our Creator. And together we join together collectively with that one voice, that one heart, and that one spirit, and that one prayer as we say, Chi miigwej gishiminado onje nongum. Miigwej jojo aki, miigwej kokomistapikizis, miigwej mishomiskizis. Nibuk sendam gishiminado onje kakina mashkawiziwin. Zogie diwin as shishmino pomadzwin, mi gwedge kina kego kishiminado. Creator, we thank you. We thank you for the beauty of life as we acknowledge our mother, the earth, our grandfather, the sun, and our grandmother, the moon. And Creator, it is my prayer for everyone who is here that you continue to bless them with that good health, good life, strength, and love. And Creator, we come together with love as we raise our hearts and we celebrate International Women's Day. To all the women and to all the girls who are here, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you are doing. And I say to you, aim for your goals. Celebrate your strength. Know your voice is powerful, for indeed those 7 grandfathers will continue to uphold you. And it is said those 7 grandfathers are love, wisdom, respect, bravery, humility, honesty, and truth. And truth is the power of our women leaders. And you are all leaders. You are all beautiful. Thank you for being here. We are community. Miigwej, thank you.
Bonjour. Hello. My name is Callista Lafreniere, Daughters of the Vote Delegate for Nipissing Temiskaming, the riding of the Honorable Anthony Rota. It is my honor to preside over the first ever virtual House of Commons sittings of Daughters of the Vote. With 338 delegates from across the country joining the session today, this really is a historic occasion. We will hear from delegates, from political party leaders, and from distinguished guests today. To begin, I am delighted to introduce the Honorable Anthony Rota, Speaker of the House of Commons, to say a few words.
Thank you, Callista. Ani, bonjour, Anthony Rota, Indishnikas, Nipissing Temiskaming Donjiva. I'm very pleased to welcome you all today on the International Women's Day to this virtual sitting of the Daughters of the Vote. This year marks the 3rd edition of this event and one that is like no other before it. I would also like to extend a particular welcome to Ms. Callista Lafreniere, the honorable member from my riding, Nipissing Temiskaming, who will be acting as Speaker of the House today. While I wish we could have gathered in person, I am pleased that we have been able to come together virtually. This is thanks to the vision and efforts of Equal Voice and to your own interest and enthusiasm in being part of Daughters of the Vote. I believe that the unique vantage point you occupy today will give you a greater understanding and appreciation for the important work performed by parliamentarians. As representatives of the Canadian people, members of Parliament craft the laws that govern us, bring the concerns of their constituents to the House of Commons, and defend the interests of our community, our country, and its citizens, both in Canada and abroad. I hope that as a result of your experience with Daughters of the Vote, you will consider a career in politics because, frankly, Parliament needs you. Il est vrai que jamais on n'aura vu autant.
We've never seen as many women as we have in the House of Commons as we see here. But only 32% of MPs are women. Things are improving. But we still have a long path to take. No society can consider itself to be full without the full participation of women, be it on a local, provincial, or national level. It is essential to hear their voices and their perspectives in the wholes.
Already making a difference in your communities. It's my hope that as you see the impact your involvement has on your fellow citizens, you will feel inspired to improve the lives of even more people and run for public office. Our country will be the richer because you have taken the time to help shape it. In fact, the House of Commons has already benefited from its involvement with Equal Voice. In 2019, federal election of Ms. Milmak Kwakak, an alumnus of Daughters of the Vote, was elected as the member for riding of Nunavut. I look forward to the day when even more Daughters of the Vote alumni are elected to this chamber, as well as to other legislatures and city halls across Canada. Today's event will give you the opportunity to hear from people who, like you, want to make a difference. Political leaders, past and present, are joining us today to share their views and their visions for our country. And I'm certain that you will find inspiration in their words to guide you on your own individual journeys. I wish you all a pleasant and productive day, and I thank you for inviting me to be part of it. Miigwech, thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Rota, for that warm welcome. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Right Honourable Kim Campbell, 19th Prime Minister of Canada and still Canada's only woman Prime Minister, something the delegates at Daughters of the Vote hope to change. Welcome, Ms. Campbell.
Thank you very much. Mille merci. I'm speaking to you from Italy. So I am probably the only one of you who is not speaking to you from Indigenous territory. But I am very pleased and always pleased to see the honor that we do to our First Nations and Indigenous people in reminding ourselves of where we have built the country of Canada and the important role that First Nations have played in building that. And I'm really happy to be here for yet another iteration of Daughters of the Vote. I was here at the very first one, where we were in the House of Commons, the original House of Commons. And it was very exciting to look around and see all of your wonderful faces in the seats that I know that many of you aspired to occupy as members of Parliament. But then, of course, the House of Commons had to be shuttered in order to be renovated, and I think asbestos and other terrible things removed and other changes made. And so we met in the new improvised House of Commons in the West Block. Who would have thought that that new House of Commons, that replacement for the old House of Commons, would itself be overtaken by the need to meet virtually? And here we are using modern technology in a way that really wasn't available when I was a member of Parliament. And I think Mr. Speaker and others will agree that we're very lucky that this demand and this set of circumstances has come at a time where we have technology that enables us to see one another and to be able to meet face to face. What I do regret is that you will not be interacting personally face to face as you've done in other iterations of Daughters of the Vote. And I think the same thing could be said for the way members of Parliament must feel about this new situation, because one of the most important things about being a parliamentarian is not just to work with your own team and members of your own party, but to take the opportunity to get to know other Canadians, to get to know people from different parties, people from different parts of the country. One of my colleagues in Parliament, Frank Oberle, once said that being a member of Parliament is like going to the best university in the world, because you can learn anything you want to learn. Whatever you're interested in knowing, whatever you need to know for policy reasons, etc., you have resources that can help you to learn it. But also hearing your fellow Canadians speaking of the realities of their parts of the country, speaking dans leur accent régionaux et tous les deux langues officielles et toutes les autres façons dont on parle quand on est aux Chambres des Communes, all the different ways that we communicate with each other, it just enriches our understanding of what it means to be Canadian. And also it enriches our understanding of why it is that we need to listen to one another, that we don't all experience our country in the same way. And so here we are having to make do with this virtual facility. And I hope you will find ways of connecting, and that down the line you will able to augment the online connections that you're making with opportunities to meet personally. So who could have foreseen that this would be the case, but here we are. But I think the circumstances that have led us to this situation are very important in reminding us of why government is so important. We are dealing now with a global pandemic, a challenge to our society, a challenge to our health and well-being, a challenge to our economic survival, a challenge to so many things. And this is a challenge that government has had to deal with, not just in Ottawa, but in all of our provinces. And if we don't understand the importance of government, if we poo-poo it, if we think, oh, it's not for me, or I don't want to get involved in politics, we set ourselves up for serious failure. And that is why I think it is particularly fortuitous that you are apprenticing as members of parliament, that you are role-playing as members of parliament at a time when it has never been more important how Parliament functions and the wisdom that people bring to making decisions. I think of my own parents who were in World War II and who lived through the Great Depression. I'm a post-war baby boomer. Every once in a while in our country, something comes along that is even a multi-generational challenge, a challenge that hasn't been experienced by everyone who is now living, and that requires new resources. And so I think this is extremely important. But the first time I spoke to you as Daughters of the Vote, I talked a lot about how things were different since I had been a member of Parliament. The fact that when I was Prime Minister, I never wore pants unless I went to a sporting event, and all sorts of certain things that were different in the olden days. And you could probably look at my speeches on the archives if you're interested in seeing all of those. But there is something else that has changed that I want to speak to you about, and that is actually the difference in general opinion about women as leaders. When I became Prime Minister in 1993, I was the first woman in Canada to do this. And there were not a lot of women around the world who were leading governments, either as presidents or as prime ministers. By the end of the 90s, I would help to become a founding member of the organization, the Council of Women World Leaders, which consisted of women who were or had been president or prime minister of their country. By 2004, there were 34 of us. Now there are well over 60. But I think what is interesting is that during this period of COVID, many people have commented on the fact that many of the countries that have dealt most successfully with this terrible challenge and political challenge and struggle have been female leaders. It's too soon, I think, to make a final evaluation. But I think what is significant is the recognition that women bring an enormous amount of strength and capacity to leading in the political arena. I never would have suggested that women are better than men, but what is more than obvious and more than clear is that women have just as many people who have strength and capacity and ability as do men. When I remember when Angela Merkel was elected leader of the Christian Democratic Party in Germany, what was it, 15 years ago, 12 years ago? And one of my colleagues in an organization called the Club of Madrid, which were former Democratic presidents and prime ministers, I was speaking to a colleague and I said, you know, the German Christian Democrats have just elected a woman as a leader. Germany, if they will form the government, Germany could have a female chancellor. And he said, oh, no. If they get elected, she won't be the chancellor. Some other guy will. And I thought, I don't think so. It was so unthinkable to him. And this was not somebody who was particularly sexist. He just couldn't imagine that Germany, with all of its tradition of male leaders, that it would actually have a woman chancellor. Well, she became chancellor. And now, as she faces her retirement this year, Angela Merkel is one of the most respected political leaders in the world. She has a global approval rating of about 70%. And I think as we look at Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand and many other places, women are establishing their ability to deal with the most difficult circumstances. And of course, Angela Merkel leads a very powerful country, and she has had a lot of very serious crises to lead her country through. And so in the period of time, in the decades since I served in Parliament became Prime Minister in 1993, since I served till today, I think there has been a real sea change in the way people see women as leaders. And that is very good for you, because that means that there's less of a skepticism to overcome. When I became Prime Minister, I was the first person who looked or sounded like me who was Prime Minister of Canada. But as we become more accustomed to people who look and sound like you and me, holding for important positions, it makes it easier for women candidates to be taken seriously. But in order to be Prime Minister, you really should try and get yourself into Parliament, hopefully become the leader of a party that can form a government. But I think it is important to understand the recognition that women leaders are getting. There is a wonderful research organization called Pew Research, and they have argued, they do studies of governance in societies all around the world, and they have argued that the single most important indicator of the social, political, and economic strength of a society is the status of its women. That if women are not empowered, if they are not educated, if they are not engaged, if they are not protected, the society simply doesn't thrive. And that is why I think it is important to understand that the reason why I and others and Equal Voice, why we are so passionate about getting women into Parliament, it's not because we want to be nice. It's not because we have some fetish about having the same, number of male and female faces. It's because we understand how important it is to the quality of governance, how important it is to the way we live together as a society. And that is why in my own life, I also work to promote women in public life around the world and other countries as well. So when you look at having a life in politics, when you interest yourself in public life, whether it's to be a candidate yourself or to support somebody else who's a candidate or to become involved in a party or somebody to get engaged in policy issues, all of this is really fundamental to the success of the democratic society. And today we are living in a very difficult time because although there are many wonderful advances that women have made, and currently in Canada, we have a prime minister who has chosen to have gender-balanced cabinets, which is extremely important, giving women the opportunity to be seen, to be doing important work and getting the experience that they need for other opportunities at leadership. But we also are living at a time where there has been pushback. We see resurgent authoritarianism coming out of Vladimir Putin and others, Eastern Europe and China. And we've also seen a growth of extremist organizations, particularly right-wing and racist extremist organizations. And that kind of politics is bad for women. If you look at the fine print, and not even always the fine print, of what those kinds of movements are advocating, it always involves some kind of regression in the status of women. So as young women who are interested in politics, who are engaged at a time when it is actually more acceptable for women to engage in leadership, you also have to understand that there is a pushback as well, and why it is important for you to be brave and to have solidarity. And that is also why I think that building relationships across party lines, because one of the things I love about Daughters of the Vote is that you all, not only do you come from all parts of the country, but you have different, to the extent that you have partisan interests, they're very different. You don't all think alike, you don't all take the same positions. But if you can develop the capacity to respect the goodwill of others who don't necessarily agree with you, you will be very much on the route to helping to create a political culture that can overcome divisive polarization and help people move together to solve problems. And so I want to say that what you are doing is wonderful and it's important. I held elected office in all three levels of government in Canada, and I always say that each one is important and each one is an education. But our national level is incredibly important and often difficult for many people to serve because we are a big country and we have to come long distances. So I hope that in your conversations, you will discuss some of the challenges that you face in different parts of the country in participating at the national level, how you might continue to use technology to make it easier to communicate when you can't always be together, but always bearing in mind the importance of meeting face to face and in informal, casual manners to build that kind of friendship, respect, and solidarity that enables you to think in the national interest and to think as the legislator for your country, not just for your party. So I hope you will have a wonderful time in this new iteration of Daughters of the Vote. When I spoke the first time, I remarked that when I was in Parliament, when I was Prime Minister, my French teacher insisted that I use the feminine version of my title, La Première Ministre. And the stationery that was printed for me said La Première Ministre, Prime Minister, La Première Ministre. And I'm the only one in Canadian history who's been able to use that stationery. And so I'm sure that somewhere over there in the Prime Minister's office suite, there is a box of old stationery, because I don't think they ever throw anything out, that says La Première Ministre. And I hope that perhaps one day one of you will be able to use it. But meanwhile, I hope that when the new House of Commons is finished and renovated and members of Parliament take their place, that some of your faces will be among those who are serving their country and their society as members of Parliament. Winston Churchill once said that of all the letters he had behind his name, MP was the one that he valued the most. I hope you will have that opportunity. All the best. Thank you. And have a great, great Daughters of the Vote.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell, for those inspiring remarks. We will now have statements from the delegates.
Please welcome your 2021 DOV delegates. Veuillez accueillir vos délégués HDS 2021.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Signal Hill.
Madam Speaker, the scales of justice are unbalanced. I come before you as a law student and community advocate to assert that our justice system is in need of reform. As we discuss the underrepresentation of women in politics, I ask too that we think about the over-representation of Indigenous and Black individuals incarcerated across our country. And just as women aren't inherently incapable of leadership, Black and Indigenous communities are not inherently more criminal. Historic and systemic prejudice propagates in the form of unequal policing, unequal access to justice, and unequal sentencing. We need more diversity on police forces, on juries, in the legal practice, and on the bench. As I speak, there has never been a single non-white person to sit on the Supreme Court of Canada. I'm calling on our government to continue to introduce and enact legislation like Bill C-22, a tip of the iceberg on the journey towards justice reform. Because our proverbial Lady Justice may be blindfolded, but we are not. Color exists, and a failure to acknowledge that leads to colorable outcomes.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Madam Speaker, every year, hundreds of Canadians require life-saving stem cell transplants to treat diseases and disorders like blood cancers, sickle cell disease, and aplastic anemia. And since only a quarter of those find a match within their own family, the rest must rely on unrelated volunteer donors to save their life. A stem cell recipient in 2016, my mom's transplant meant that she got to see me cross the stage for my master's degree, watch my brother marry the love of his life, and be by my side when I ran in the 2019 federal election. But my mom passed away a few months ago, Madam Speaker, and today I ask that eligible Canadians consider registering for the Canadian Blood Services Stem Cell Registry and make the commitment to save lives like hers. Canadians between the ages of 17 and 35 can register at blood.ca/stemcells. You will then receive a cheek swabbing kit and instructions in the mail. There are many reasons to join Canada's Lifeline, Madam Speaker. My mom, hero, and best friend was mine. Thank you.
L'Honorable Député de Acadie-Bathurst.
Bonjour Madame la Présidente. Nous le savons bien que nous sommes en pandémie mondiale, une crise sanitaire qui touche tout le monde, peu importe où elle se trouve. Évidemment, puisque la crise sanitaire est une crise de santé et que cela revient aux provinces de se gouverner à ce sujet,
turn to the provinces and we need to discuss a big problem. Francophone citizens are the minority. The interpreter cannot hear.
Et je salue le travail acharné des traductrices qui
We often have interpretation or simultaneous interpretation or only things that are translated or spoken in English. And I would like to salute the work of translators, but the pandemic has delayed the new law. And it's also heightened the importance of this law for Francophones throughout the country. Likewise, we hope that the errors of the past will never happen again. As Francophones in Canada are not second-class citizens. We are citizens and we must have the same rights as our Anglophone
for Thunder Bay,
counterparts.
Superior North.
Madam Speaker, the climate crisis we continue to be in is the most urgent threat we're facing, not only in Canada, but globally. This crisis was created by industries and continues to be perpetuated by governments like our very own. Protecting our natural resources from extinction needs to be a priority if we're to continue living for the next 7 generations. However, any solution cannot be developed or implemented without Indigenous peoples like myself, whose ancestors and relations have been living on these lands since time immemorial, are at the forefront. Our leadership, knowledge, and respect for the land is the only way we'll truly change the course we're currently on and ensure Mother Earth's survival. By enabling Indigenous people and allowing us to assert our land use and rights, we can eliminate issues that stop true change from happening. Issues like co-option of nature-based solutions by governments and corporations who think planting 2 billion trees is enough. We can't plant our way out of this. We need fundamental changes to the way we combat climate change, and we need them now.
The Honourable Member for Avalon.
Madam Speaker, 1 in 3 women in Canada will experience unwanted sexual behavior in public, but only 5% of sexual assaults are ever reported to the police. Many victims of this crime make a decision never to report these crimes because they believe that no justice will be done. Recently, Parliament has brought forward a bill, Bill C-5, to amend the Judges Act and the Criminal Code. This bill will establish seminars for the continuing education of judges, which will include, quote, seminars on matters related to sexual assault law in a social context, end quote. These seminars are an important step forward in improving access to the justice system for survivors of sexual violence like myself and so many women and girls across Canada. By ensuring that our judges understand the barriers victims face when deciding whether to report these crimes and the biases that surround victims of sexual violence, we are ensuring that all Canadians who seek justice in our courtrooms will be seen, heard, and treated fairly. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
L'honorable député de Ahuntsic-Cartierville.
Madame Speaker, je porte ma voix haut et fort pour les femmes comme moi.
Today I am
Les
raising my
intérêts des
voice
femmes et des
loudly for
minorités ne
women
sont pas
like me.
représentés de
The
façon
interests
juste et
of women and
équitable,
minorities are
spécifiquement
not
lorsqu'il vient le temps de
represented in a
voter.
fair or
Je
equitable
suis une femme
manner.
musulmane arabe noire. Je suis
Specifically,
une
when it's
femme
time to
issue de
vote,
minorité.
I'm a
Les
Muslim
femmes et les
black
personnes
woman,
comme moi
part
qui
of a
représentent
minority
diverses
subgroup,
cultures,
and
langues
women
et
like
foi
me
sont
represent
ignorées et
diverse
sous-représentées
culture,
dans notre
language, and
société.
faith,
Nos
and we're
cultures et nos
ignored
langues
in
ne
our
sont pas
society
célébrées,
or
mais plutôt une source
underrepresented.
pour
Our
créer des
cultures and
différences et
languages are
parfois
not
même
celebrated,
justifier
but
un traitement de
rather a
citoyenneté de
source for
seconde classe.
creating difference and
Lorsque je dis
sometimes
ça, je
treated
pense aux
like
lois créées pour nous
second-class
diviser, aux
citizens.
lois qui visent
Now,
certaines
I'm
communautés plus que
talking about
d'autres et je
laws
pense
that
aux injustices
divide us,
auxquelles nous,
laws
les
that are
minorités,
aimed
faisons
at some
face. Je pense au
communities rather than
racisme
others.
systémique.
And I'm
Il est
thinking
temps de
about
nous inclure dans vos
systemic
plans et vos
racism.
projets,
It's time
de
to include
combattre la
us in
haine et de
our
faire
plans
place
and
pour du vrai
projects.
changement.
Fight
Ça
against
commence
hate,
avec
just to
le
make room
vote.
for real
Le vote
change.
des
That starts
communautés
with the vote.
minoritaires
The
est
vote for
important
minority
et il faut le
communities
prendre en
is
considération.
important and it
Notre
must be taken
diversité est
into
une force.
consideration.
Merci.
Our diversity is our strength.
The
Thank
honourable
you.
member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Madam Speaker, my riding is home to Canada's second largest petrochemical cluster, which is responsible for more than 20% of the community's employment. As Canada transitions to much-needed carbon neutrality by 2050, it is imperative that equitable job transition for those in the petrochemical industry is guaranteed. The government must provide a holistic approach to this transition, ensuring workers have a voice in the process and address the gender and racial inequities that exist in the current industry. Rather than risk repeating errors of the past transitions, such as the Atlantic cod fishery, it is essential that the government commits to a reliable timeline to protect blue-collar Canadians as well as future careers of young people. Job training incentives, green technology investment, and retirement incentives are just a few methods that can become part of this equitable transition. Policy and market forces are already directing investment away from the petrochemical industry, but guidance and support are necessary to transition communities that may otherwise be left behind in the greening of the Canadian economy.
The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Madam Speaker, in 2016, our community mourned the death of Abdirahman Abdi, a Somali-Canadian man who had lost his life following a brutal encounter with Ottawa police. Abdirahman Abdi lived with mental health issues, but what was so devastating about this case is that his death was preventable. In recent years, there's been a stark increase in the number of fatalities stemming from interactions between police and individuals with mental health issues, and yet our government has done little to address this. In Canada, Black and racialized communities are disproportionately impacted by mental health issues due to the cumulative effects of social inequities, systemic racial discrimination, poverty, and more. Despite this, services in these communities remain heavily underfunded. If our government truly wants to bridge the gap, we need to shift government resources to better support our vulnerable communities by decreasing law enforcement budgets and redirecting those funds towards extensive mental health care services. Thank you.
L'honorable député de
Honourable
Louis
member
Hébert.
for Louis
Madame la
Hébert.
Présidente, aujourd'hui, ça fait 100
Madam
ans
Speaker,
depuis que la
today
première
marks
femme fut élue au
100
Parlement,
years since the first
85
woman
ans
was
depuis qu'on
elected
élit
to
la première
Parliament,
mairesse, et
85
28 ans
years
depuis
since
que la
having the
première
first
femme
woman
fut
mayor,
élue première
and
ministre
28
du
years
Canada.
since the first woman was
Malgré ces
elected as
avancées,
Prime
elle se trouve dans
Minister.
une impasse depuis
In
près de
spite of
20
these
ans en matière de
advances, we've been at an
Et pourquoi?
impasse for
Madame
20
la
years.
Présidente, le
Why?
droit est encore
Madam
un enjeu
Speaker, this is a
majeur en
continued
2021 et les
issue.
femmes doivent
In
encore franchir plusieurs
2021,
obstacles
women face
afin d'accéder
many
aux sphères
hurdles to
décisionnelles.
gain
Les tâches
access to the
familiales relèvent
decision-making
encore
process.
majoritairement des femmes. Les métiers
Family-related
typiquement féminins sont
responsibilities
sous-valorisés.
are held
Alors
by
qu'on
the
dira d'un homme
majority
qu'il
of
est
us.
déterminé, on dira d'une femme
And
qu'elle est plutôt obstinée. Les femmes
women
sont plus
are,
portées à souffrir du
well,
syndrome
we
de
say a man is
l'imposteur et le
determined, we
phénomène
say
du
a
old
woman is
boys
stubborn.
club
Women are
persiste
more likely
encore
to
dans nos organisations.
suffer from the imposter
Avec ces
syndrome and
conditions,
the
comment
old boys
pouvons-nous nous
club
attendre à
phenomenon,
ce que les femmes
which
osent briguer
persists.
un poste
With this
décisionnel?
status, how can we
Madame la
expect
Présidente, c'est
women
par
to
l'action
dare to get
collective
a
que nous
decision-making
pouvons
position?
aspirer à une vraie
Madam Speaker,
transformation de
it's
la
through
société.
collective action that we
La
can
parité
aspire to
n'est
have
pas
a
encore
true
atteinte. Elle doit
transformation
continuer
in
à lutter
society.
pour que cela
Parity has
change
still
enfin.
not been reached. We have
The
to
honourable
continue
member
for
for
it to
Victoria.
change.
Madam Speaker, the female and non-binary politicians who work in Victoria and across Canada, including our MPs, MLAs, city councillors, and many others, regularly receive threats and harassment online in much larger quantities than their male counterparts. Going beyond political arguments and political threats, women receive threats of sexual harassment, abuse, and even death online. Although platforms such as Twitter and Facebook are working on deleting these kinds of messages, the pure number received by many women in politics is too high for the companies to successfully rid of them all, while also allowing for discourse and free speech. Additionally, companies are not subjected to enough accountability from the government to keep users safe. Indigenous and POC women and trans and non-binary individuals also face even higher amounts of hate and harassment. There must be more action taken to prevent online harassment towards women and non-binary people. Hateful and aggressive tweets and comments, at the very least, are harmful to one's mental health. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Orleans.
Madam Speaker, Black students, Indigenous students, and many students of color are tired of experiencing and witnessing racism on campus. We are expected to sit through lectures, hearing the use of words that have historically perpetuated and continue to perpetuate hate with no complaint. We are expected to go through our post-secondary careers, rarely and sometimes never learning from professors that look like us, with no complaint. And on top of this, we are often doing the heavy lifting and educating and informing on issues of race, with no complaint. It is one thing to speak about issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and it's another thing for universities to prioritize these practices in hiring professors, training, recruitment, and many other factors that influence students. It's time for universities to reevaluate their focus on EDI and create an atmosphere where BIPOC students are able to flourish. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cardigan.
Madam Speaker, we are witnessing the symptoms of an exhausted planet. Wildfires are intensifying, the Arctic ice is melting at an alarming rate, and most recently, the COVID-19 global pandemic has emerged from pressures humans have put on global ecosystems. Our climate cannot withstand further unnecessary greenhouse gas emissions and environmental degradation. We must act now and commit to a green recovery which must include strengthening the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, investing in green economy jobs, protecting and conserving our ecosystems and biodiversity, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and a just transition for all workers. Canada must legally recognize the right to a healthy environment. COVID-19 has exacerbated the inequalities within our systems. We must commit to rebuilding an economy that protects the environment, supports our communities, and empowers future generations. Thank you.
L'Honorable Député de Lac-Saint-Louis.
Madame la Présidente, ces dernières décennies, le Canada s'est révélé une terre d'accueil pour les vagues d'immigration successives. Néanmoins, cette conception idyllique que nous avons de notre pays n'est pas représentative de la réalité. Étant moi-même fille de parents immigrants algériens, j'atteste que la contribution et la présence des immigrants est essentielle au développement global du Canada. C'est pour cette raison que nous nous devons de faciliter leur intégration socio-économique. Durant les 5 premières années de leur présence au Canada, les immigrants font face à de nombreux obstacles et défis, notamment un taux de
They face a number of barriers, challenges, a higher level of unemployment that a person originally from Canada doesn't face. According to Stats Canada, 35% of immigrants and 43% of immigrant families who have a non-North American degree hold positions for which they are overqualified. I'm thinking of doctors, immigrants, teachers. I call on the government to find a solution that immigrants, the words are not.
For Winnipeg Centre.
Speaker, there is a water crisis on First Nations in the midst of a global pandemic. This basic human right is being ignored. During the 2015 election campaign, Justin Trudeau promised to eliminate all long-term water advisories on First Nations by March 2021, yet it is still an ongoing injustice towards First Nations. Currently, there are 58 communities that do not have access to clean drinking water. This is unacceptable. This is dehumanizing. Indigenous lives are not a priority from this government. Indigenous Services Mark Miller announced that the government won't be meeting their promise by ending all Indigenous boil water advisories by March 2021. This is systemic racism. Why can Canada create pipelines during a pandemic but can't follow through their commitment by ending all boil water advisories when Indigenous peoples are in need of clean drinking water? Indigenous peoples have been waiting decades and cannot wait any longer. Nesakana First Nation is experiencing a water crisis. In October, the community was evacuated during a pandemic due to unsafe water. Now ask yourself, would this be different if a municipality had a boil water advisory for a week? Indigenous people's health and lives are on the line right now.
The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Madam Speaker, rural schools in my riding often do not receive a lot of funding because they have low enrollment numbers. Students in rural schools do not have as many opportunities for success as students in urban areas. Rural schools often do not have access to classes and extracurriculars that will prepare students for specialized career and post-secondary paths. In rural schools, students from diverse cultural backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, and exceptionalities are rarely given the specialized programming they need to succeed. More funding needs to go to rural schools so that every student, regardless of where they're from, has the same opportunities to succeed in their career and educational endeavors as students from urban centers.
L'honorable député de Rivière-du-Nord.
Madame la Présidente, aujourd'hui, je prends la parole pour vous parler de l'obésité. C'est une
to you about
problématique qui touche un bon nombre de personnes au
It's a
Canada,
problem that
mais les
affects a
traitements
great
restent
number of
insuffisants.
people in Canada,
Les
but the
frais reliés aux
treatment is
médicaments avoisinent
insufficient.
des 300 à
The
400 $
cost
par
in
mois,
terms
et
of
ce n'est pas tout le monde qui a les
medications are
moyens
close
de
to
les procurer
$300 to
ni les assurances.
$400 per
De
month, and
plus,
not everyone
le
has
système
either
de
the
santé
means to
reste
pay that or
inefficace pour
insurance.
bien soigner
Also,
les
the
gens
health
atteints de cette
system is
maladie
ineffective in
chronique, car
taking
il
good care of
promouvoit une
those
solution
suffering
qui
from
se
this
résume à une
chronic
simple perte de poids.
disease,
Mais
as it
il y a les
simply
causes
promotes
sous-jacentes
the
qui doivent
idea
être
of
traitées, mais qui
losing
ne le sont
weight.
pas,
But there are
car
other
il y a des préjugés
factors
qui nuisent au
that
traitement qu'il
should
pourrait
be
recevoir.
treated, yet there's
Donc
prejudice
aujourd'hui,
that
je vous
adversely
demande un
affect the
changement
treatment that the
radical du
person could
système de
receive.
santé
So today
face
I'm
à
asking for a
l'obésité.
radical
Merci.
change of the health system
The
for those
honourable
faced with
member for
obesity.
Mission Matsqui, Fraser Canyon.
Madam Speaker, the world is bearing witness to one of the largest protests in human history. Since November, Indian farmers have been peacefully protesting against the 3 Indian agricultural bills in hopes of having their voices heard. However, they have been faced with human rights violations. On behalf of my riding, I urge the Canadian Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs to speak with Indian officials and to defend international human rights. Agriculture reform is not only an Indian issue, but also a local one. In my riding, the agriculture sector has supported immigrants and Canadians for generations. Today, the sector is confronted with pressing issues such as climate change, crop protection, and labor costs. Further, diminishing prices of wholesale crops have bolstered additional financial challenges. Action needs to be taken. Farmers have supported Canadians and will continue to do so. But today, we must stand with our farmers. Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Constituents of my riding, Calgary Centre, like all Albertans, approach challenges with considerable resilience, tenacity, and drive. The mandate of this House has an obligation to embolden and bolster opportunities for Albertans to demonstrate this resilience, tenacity, and drive. This must be done with a spirit of cooperation and collaboration that has evaded this House for too long. Despite our perceived differences, our vision for prosperity is not all that different. Canadians are watching, Madam Speaker. There has never been greater urgency to see leadership as we face adversity and austerity we could never have before anticipated. This leadership looks like courage, acts like integrity, and speaks for our collective conscience.
The honourable member for the Northwest Territories.
Madam Speaker, the impacts of colonization, residential schools, systematic racism, and displacement have left our Indigenous populations with high rates of mental health issues and substance abuse. The Northwest Territories sees high rates of suicide, homelessness, crime, and the devastating loss of culture, language, and identity. We have the highest rate of hospital stays in the country due to substance use, more than 6 times the national average, but we have no addictions treatment facility. We have no transitional housing for those returning from treatment in surrounding provinces. We need more supportive aftercare programs to be introduced and stronger counseling services. We're used to these realities, but we shouldn't have to be. The people of the North are strong and resilient, and our cultures are rich and diverse. But we've been bound by the chains of these generational curses. Standing here with 338 incredible women leaders, my hope grows that our country will someday reach reconciliation. For the North, prioritizing our mental health and addictions management is reconciliation. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Madam Speaker, watching the news this past summer, I nearly forgot that Canada was in the midst of a pandemic. Instead of focusing on Canada's COVID-19 response, the media and Parliament were absorbed with the WE scandal, adding to the long, ever-growing list of government controversies. Witnessing scandal after scandal, it has become apparent that a lack of accountability and transparency exists within the government. Furthermore, it is clear that this is not an issue unique to Conservatives, Liberals, or any other party. Rather, it is a Canadian issue. While it may be easy to point our fingers at those across the aisle, we must recognize that tactics of blame will not absolve our government of scandal. Rather, in order to solve this, concrete measures must be taken. Madam Speaker, when we celebrate a return to normalcy post-COVID-19, let us strive for better for our federal government and for Canadians, including granting increased power to the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner and reducing partisanship in addressing and rectifying scandals.
The Honourable Member for Toronto St. Paul's.
Madam Speaker, it is my honour to present the issue of our need to develop a digital rights agenda. Digital rights include our right to privacy, combating misinformation, and reducing data-driven discrimination. Canada is a producer of talent in emerging technologies, and we should also become a pillar in advancing digital rights. The following are a few important issues that should be included. Number 1, ensuring transparency and accountability of the use of our data. Number 2, securing affordable and reliable access to broadband for all Canadians. Number 3, building digital literacy amongst the people. Why are digital rights important? Firstly, they are a part of our human rights. Secondly, they help form responsible innovation. We've all seen movies such as The Terminator, which is ultimately about the unfettered development of technology. The government has proposed Bill C-11, the Digital Charter Implementation Act, which I see as a first step. I hope there is fruitful debate on this bill and that it will be implemented.
L'Honorable Député de Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle.
Madame la Présidente, je n'ai pas besoin de vous expliquer les impacts de la COVID-19. Par contre, il y a aussi un mal silencieux.
Yet, there is a silent harm. Women carry the heavy weight of the pandemic on their shoulders, or given that the virus affects us all, it would be false to say it does not discriminate. The studies state that in January 2021, 63,400 women lost their jobs, twice as many as men, mostly in female-led fields, including teaching and nursing, and those are the most necessary yet dangerous. That explains the disproportionate number of women who catch the disease and who die. I'm also speaking of issues of unpaid work, which was already an issue before the pandemic, and this adds a great deal of stress. And on top of that, domestic violence exacerbated by the lockdown. Like always, women, we will remain strong as we are resilient. In the meantime, the inequality cannot be ignored. So thank you to all women carrying the burden of the disease. Without you, we wouldn't have tomorrow.
Member for Calgary Confederation.
Madam Speaker, period poverty may be an unfamiliar term to some, but it's a very familiar experience to many who menstruate. It's defined by a lack of regular access to products used to manage menstrual bleeding, such as pads, liners, and/or tampons. Recent studies have reported that 33% of women in Canada under the age of 25 have experienced or will experience period poverty at some point in their lives. Period poverty also disproportionately affects marginalized communities and those living in rural areas. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has only accelerated the impact of period poverty across Canada. Local community organizations frequently report that menstrual products are some of the most requested but least donated items. It's time for Canada to follow in the footsteps of countries like Scotland and New Zealand by taking action against period poverty. Canada must ensure that anyone needing period products has access to them when they need them.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier.
Madam Speaker, when I think of Indigenous issues in Canada, I think of our country itself, as these are not the issues of my people, they are the issues of Canada. Why is it that I, as an Algonquin woman, do not feel safe day or night walking down my own street? Why is it that 4% of Canadians are Indigenous, yet 17% of Canadian murder victims are Indigenous? Why is my life expectancy 5 years less than the average Canadian white woman? Why is it that the people who were rooted here long before the government continuously fear for their lives? Shannon Alexander and Maisie Ojic deserve to be here today.
They deserve to be sitting in these seats because they are more than the statistic that the government categorized them in. They are people's aunties, sisters, daughters, and friends. These women are intelligent, beautiful, loved, and sacred. I call upon all government officials and systems to immediately take all needed action to prevent, investigate, and punish and compensate for violence against Indigenous women.
The Honourable Member for Caribou, Prince George.
Dear Madam Speaker, despite COVID-19 having a deep and continuing impact on the mental health of Canadians, Northern BC saw the largest decline in suicide rates in BC in the year 2020. Further, I applaud MP Todd Doherty's efforts to bring the 988 mental health crisis line to Canada. But this is where the celebration ends. I have witnessed suicide affect my friends, my high school, and my community. Counseling services may be inaccessible and costly, and crisis lines can also be inaccessible and have been overwhelmed amidst COVID. But before the resources is the knowledge that anyone can learn. I urge the government to bring adequate, accessible, and universal mental health knowledge to our school systems and our communities that has the potential to save lives. I leave you with one question. If someone you know or a stranger came up to you and said, "I am suicidal," do you know what to do?
L'Honorable Député de Glengarry Prescott Russell.
Madame la Présidente, je me lève en chambre virtuelle afin de reconnaître l'importance de la diversité des membres de l'industrie agricole et agroalimentaire canadienne et le
agricultural and
support
agri-food industry and the support required. This is key to allow us to improve the trust that consumers have in our products, to reduce food insecurity, and adopt sustainable practices for our environment. A young and diverse population means for the agri-food sector innovative solutions and a renewal of motivation and collaboration. On this International Women's Day, I would like to acknowledge all women involved in one way or another in agriculture, in Glengarry, Prescott, Russell, and throughout Canada. We must do everything in our power to eliminate the barriers that they face in terms of taking their place in leadership and allow them to amplify their voices. Madam Speaker, I wish a happy International Women's Day to all women involved in agriculture. The Honourable Member for Longueuil, Charles Lemoyne. Madam Speaker, the current COVID-19 pandemic does not spare anyone, but it does not affect us all to the same degree. Some vulnerable populations are more affected, including women. During the first wave, we felt that we were even more affected. Many women had lost working hours and even lost their jobs. And in Quebec, in my riding, a number of women who had precarious employment that were affected by the closures, be it in retail stores, daycare, teaching establishments, they also often work on the front lines and they undergo a great deal of pressure. The government has promised us an economic recovery. Madam Speaker, let's ensure that this recovery benefits all Canadians. We have to act quickly and now. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Elmwood, Transcona.
Madam Speaker, the spread of misinformation regarding COVID-19 has affected virtually every single Canadian. And this problem has been noted in the House of Commons since the very first lockdown. Yet, in March 2021, misinformation about COVID feels just as loud and prevalent as it did in March 2020. The reality is, misinformation isn't going away anytime soon, and addressing the lack of informational literacy that enables its spread is essential. The need for informational and media literacy in Canada has been highlighted, as have the gaps in educational curriculums. Future strategies on combating misinformation should not be reactive for when misinformation is on the rise. Education can be used as a proactive and preventative measure that should give Canadians the tools to critically assess information that they face online or in daily conversations. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon Grasswood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Canadian agriculture industry is leading the way in creative innovations and technologies that can help the issue of food security in this world. Although Canadian farmers struggle every day with challenges such as public scrutiny, international trade disputes, and environmental concerns and policies. In particular, the implemented carbon tax that came into effect in 2018. As a fifth-generation farmer from Saskatchewan myself, I see how our family farm is affected as well as any other farmer in Western Canada. The carbon tax has jeopardized many farms in Canada as it can cost Western Canadian families millions of dollars extra in taxes per year, as well as increased costs for transportation of their grains and an increased cost for essential farm inputs. How are the Canadian farmers supposed to stay competitive with other countries and keep producing mass amounts of food when they can't afford to keep their operations running? So, I ask all of you to stand up for the Canadian agriculture industry so that you can keep being provided with safe, sustainable, and affordable food to put on your plate. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Yukon.
Honorable member for Yukon. Madam Speaker, language rights are a current issue, given that language is an integral part of our identity and our culture. In the Yukon, we are privileged to live in a multilingual milieu where notably we have English, French, as well as the 8 languages spoken by the 13 nations of our territory. We have to acknowledge the challenges faced by those who speak each of these languages varies a great deal. The carriage of the which is a language to the future communities, access to languages, the remoteness of our communities. These are 3 examples. And that said, it's essential that the efforts deployed by community members be recognized and valued. Initiatives such as the modernization of the Official Language Act, education regarding language rights are necessary and should be numerous in order to ensure the vitality of the language that are at the heart of our history.
Madam Speaker, Alberta's opioid deaths soared during COVID-19 pandemic in deadliest year ever. More than 3 Albertans dying per day due to opioid epidemic. 2 news headlines clearly demonstrating how Albertans are feeling the detrimental effects of the national opioid epidemic. More than 900 Albertans died from accidental opioid poisoning in the first 10 months of 2020. The opioid epidemic is getting worse. It's an Albertan city that has seen the highest per capita rate for overdoses across the nation. Our community is struggling. Our people are struggling. Greater investment into harm reduction services and creating a national safe supply are no longer just suggestions. They're required to keep Canadians safe. So my question for you is, how many more Albertans need to die before we start prioritizing a greater investment into harm reduction services?
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Madam Speaker, we are all aware that Indigenous women are significantly underrepresented in this House. Indigenous women make up 4% of the Canadian population, yet only 4 Indigenous women were elected in 2019. These 4 voices make up only 1% of these seats. The disproportionate representation of Indigenous women in Canadian politics needs to be addressed. Indigenous women are more often discussed as statistics of colonial violence than for our successes. Consequently, when Indigenous women become successful, we are treated as quotas and welcomed with tokenism. Even though we are deserving, we are told that we should feel like imposters for having a voice in a colonial institution. Tomorrow, there will be only 4 Indigenous women with seats in this House, which tells us that Indigenous women need an equal voice in politics, not only today, but every day. Thank you.
L'honorable député de
Mégantic-L'Érable. Madam Speaker, the hashtag #MeToo movement is one that we must still speak of. Why? It's simple. When you find that the totality of women that you have met were victims of sexual harassment or sexual assault, and today I want to find a way to help these women. So the question that I'm asking you has no link with either the justice system or with the efforts implemented to help these women. Today, I want to know if it's possible. How is it today in 2021 women still experience so much sexual harassment or are victims of sexual assault, be it in a professional context or in their personal life?
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Madam Speaker, I'm a soldier who's just returned home from a 6-month deployment overseas, and I'm here to speak on the inescapable culture of racism and misogyny within the military. 7% of reservist women like myself will be sexually assaulted by a colleague in her career. There are active members of hate groups within our ranks. There's a 64% acquittal rate in assault cases tried in military courts, with reprimands ending at demotions or minor fines. And this is just what published reports say. What I know is that I've seen countless abusers and white supremacists get away with everything you can imagine, and those that don't are just moved to different units. What I know is every woman and racialized member I've met in this career has experienced discrimination serving this country. Madam Speaker, I believe if the Prime Minister saw what I see as a queer woman of color among the lowest ranks of his organization, he couldn't call himself a feminist or an ally, realizing the rampant oppression in an organization he has executive authority over. The time has come for progressive, brave, independently investigated, and system-focused policy to address the hate that occurs in his military. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michelle Casa, and I'm representing the riding of Waterloo, Ontario at this year's Daughters of the Vote conference. I'm so honored to be here today and to introduce the leader of the Green Party of Canada, Annamie Paul. Annamie has really inspired me these past few months because of her tenacity and her outspoken advocacy for climate justice, Indigenous sovereignty, and a just recovery for Canada.
Hello, and first and foremost, happy International Women's Day. It is such a pleasure to be with you today. Je veux souhaiter tout le monde une joyeuse journée internationale de la femme. Thank you, Michelle, so much for the introduction. It is such a wonderful thing to be with you for another Daughters of the Vote. This is the second time that I've had the chance to participate, but I remember where Equal Voice started from all those years ago when I was a member of the steering committee and we would meet in the kitchens of the different members of the steering committee back in the early 2000s working to get Equal Voice off the ground. And it is extraordinary how far we have come. I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. Je vous adresse aujourd'hui des territoires traditionnels des Mississauga, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, et Huron-Wendat. Today is International Women's Day, and we know that this one is unlike others that have come before exactly because of everything that we have been through since we celebrated International Women's Day in 2020. We know that the pandemic has particularly hit women hard, including essential workers, including those in sectors that women tend to work in, including women in long-term care. And in particular, we know that women that are racialized, immigrants, Indigenous women are amongst those even harder hit by this pandemic. And so this is a moment for us to reflect on the value that we place on women, on their role in our society, on how we can lift them up and support them in ways that we were not able to prior to the pandemic, that we have failed to do during the pandemic, and that we need to do in the future. Today on International Women's Day, I am struck by the fact that you will only be speaking to one federal leader today who is a woman. This is an area where we simply are not living up to our potential, and it's a sign of how far we still have to go. At this moment, we only have one woman premier out of the 10 provinces and 10 provinces and 3 territories. And we have federal parties that have never elected a woman to be a leader. And so this is a moment again for us to say that the place for women is right at the center of politics at its very highest levels, that our voices are needed, that our voices are necessary, and that without our perspectives, we cannot truly hope to design positive public policies on behalf of people in Canada. La Journée internationale des femmes est aussi une journée pour
to promise to do everything that's necessary to assure that our recovery will be a green recovery and a feminist recovery. It's the moment to act and to stop just speaking about necessary changes and make it green.
Because we know that there is a lot of work to be done if we are going to ensure that women emerge from this pandemic with more safety and more security. We need new universal programs. We need to complete our social safety net. We need to ensure that there is true racial and social justice. These are commitments that we should all be making today as we commit to accept the challenge and choose to accept the challenge for true change. And let's make sure that we are protecting women around the world. Let's be leaders in protecting and supporting women in developing countries as they seek vaccinations to protect themselves against this pandemic. Let's make sure that we're fighting for the human rights of women around the world in places like the Xinjiang region of China, where Uyghur women are right now suffering from gender-based crimes against humanity. C'est le moment pour vous d'assumer vos rôles comme leader, d'être ambitieuse pour vos futurs et pour l'avenir du Canada. It's time for you to run. It's time for you to be. I'm here as a woman leading a federal party to say you in any way that I can. I thank you for your leadership. I thank you for being part of this very important event. Congratulations on your accomplishments, and I wish you all a very happy International Women's Day, une très joyeuse Journée internationale de la femme. Merci beaucoup.
Hello, my name is Alicia Fernandez, and I'm the 2021 Daughters of the Vote delegate for the riding of Cloverdale-Langley. I'm so honored to be here today and to introduce the leader of the new Democratic Party, Jagmeet Singh.
Yes, thank you so much. Honored to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share some words with you all. And a big happy International Women's Day, une joyeuse fête internationale des femmes à tout le monde. So I want you to know I want to be an ally. I don't have all the answers, and I feel like a lot of the people here, the incredible delegates, you have a lot of the answers. So I want you to know that I can be counted on as an ally. I don't want to try to give you all the answers and try to do what a lot of folks I feel end up doing, trying to mansplain things. I'm here to be an ally. And one of the things that I want to acknowledge is that what for me was a really incredible moment when I was first elected and I walked into the House of Commons and saw the Daughters of the Vote, all the delegates there in that house, taking over that house, taking that space. It was a beautiful vision. It was very powerful. And it's something that we need to realize. We've got to get past this moment where there are not the representation of what Canada looks like being reflected in the halls of power. We have to go beyond that. We've got to fix that. But I also want to acknowledge this is a pandemic and things have been really tough, and that it's been tough particularly on women. But though you're not there in Parliament, I do want to acknowledge that you are in your power in your communities, and there's something very beautiful about that as well. But I do want to acknowledge that this pandemic has disproportionately hit women, has disproportionately impacted racialized women, women in general, and young people. And so I want you to know that I see you and I hear you, and I know that that's the case. And I'm committed to making sure we do everything possible to remedy that. That means making sure we make the right investments in the future that specifically rehire and recruit and support women back into the workforce. Policies like childcare that's universal and public are fundamental. I also want to acknowledge that we still have a society where women are not paid the same as men, that gender pay equity is still not there, and that you can count on me as an ally to make sure that happens. But I also want you to know that, and when we look at the recovery has to be one that focuses on women, and that means not just big infrastructure spends, which are vital, and we've got to make sure we're investing in jobs that help us fight the climate crisis, but we also have to invest in jobs that are specifically where women are more represented. So the care economy has to be a big part of what we do. I know that the pandemic has hit our seniors, and that's why we're fighting to say we've got to remove profit out of long-term care. And that specifically also impacts a lot of our elders, who are often more so or disproportionately women that are impacted by some of those policies. Donc, vous pouvez compter sur moi comme un allié. Je sais que
I know that the pandemic has been so difficult, but I want to say that when I saw all this vision of all the delegates in the House of Commons, it was so women and minorities are represented in the hallways of power. That is very important for me. So as an ally, I would like to encourage you as head of a political party. I'm going to assure that I'm going to recruit candidates. I'm going to really recruit those who represent the country. You can count on me. I also want to acknowledge that minorities and women have been most affected by the pandemic. We have to have policies to deal with that. You can count on me.
Be able to spend some time with you, but I really believe in your power, and I want you to celebrate your power and rest in that and take time to understand that there's so much that you can do and so much that we need you to do. So please get involved, please take part, and please be a part of the future of this country. You are the present and the future, and I'm awed by what you can do and what you're already doing. And I'm just really thankful to be able to have some time to share with you. In closing, something that I think can't go without saying is that we continue to face not just barriers in the halls of power and both publicly and privately, but we also continue to see violence against women on the rise. And so I want you to know that I also acknowledge that, and that systems of inequality where women have less power in society are often some of the causes of this. And it's also men that are at the cause of this. In terms of violence against women. So again, as an ally, I want you to know you can count on me to fight against those inequalities that perpetuate that violence and to acknowledge that men need to do better. So thank you so much. Merci encore. C'est vraiment un plaisir.
Je suis la déléguée de Saint-Jean dans le cadre du programme Héritière du suffrage. Aujourd'hui, j'ai l'honneur de vous présenter le chef du Bloc québécois, Yves-François Blanchet.
Introducing the leader of the Bloc québécois, Yves-François Blanchet.
Bonjour, mesdames, et
bonjour,
quelques messieurs aussi
women and ladies and some gentlemen as well. It is a real pleasure to meet with you today. Please indicate the time. I don't want to go over my limit. I want to mention there have been many comments about a day that comes every year. And it's a day of hope. And we have other memories to multiply the gestures aimed at make these legitimate aspects part of society. Society is progressing. Women have a delay in terms of their benefits. And as society declines, whatever the circumstances are, women are the first to feel that. The most a vital example that we can see is women in the pandemic. The jobs that are most exposed and often far from being the best paid are the jobs that are found in health, in teaching, the jobs in other daycare services, or be it restaurant or hotel services. They're not such well-paid jobs, but yes, these are jobs that are on the first line. And often these are jobs that are held by women. I had the chance when I had my first as a MP in 2008 to 2014, I had some numbers as well as the head of cabinet and the premier we had a woman, and that also we had the whip who was a woman. There was a certain kind of normality that was found, and there was something that was somewhat yet naive, because we see this in this ensemble of just decisions, statistics. The battle continues, and it continues based on solidarity. The base, and maybe it's for you to decide, it's not me to decide, but to welcome those who are sharing in your combat. I think that there are more importantly, I think there are men who share your struggle. And there are those who say and think that they're sharing your combat, but they don't do it. And they do it imperfectly, perhaps mine as well. But we have to have the will and an opening and a listening and compassion. Progress has to be made in solidarity and welcoming all those. And within our day-to-day life, we also have the issue of Parliament. We have discovered in the National Assembly of Quebec that when the first women began to hold seats, or when we began to see more female members, things began to transform. We often saw this more brute behavior that was shown within Parliament, and these things were attenuated. We often saw these issues and these women within a certain space. We see encouragement of that space, within that space, and it's not easy because politics is difficult. But it's thanks to you that we will get ahead with women in a caucus that must see parity, so that it's natural to name women, that for Parliament to be equal, to be adequately represented as a portrait of the society. We still have a lot of work to do, but in the meantime, I would tell you, and I often say it, that in spite of everything, society does not have the representation of their better half. So let's admit our imperfections. Let's assure that young people like you can have solutions in order to represent not just who we are, but who we should be. I thank you infinitely.
Hello, my name is Jillian Maiorino, and I am the 2021 Daughters of the Vote delegate for the riding of Durham. I am so thrilled to be here today and to have the opportunity to introduce the leader of the official opposition, the Honorable Erin O'Toole.
Go ahead. You're muted.
How about that? Perfect. Well, thank you, Jillian, and thank you to the Equal Voice team for making sure the Daughters of the Vote continue amid the challenges of COVID-19. Last week, I had a great opportunity to meet and chat with Jillian, who's representing my home riding of Durham today. Jillian is a fourth-year political science student at Guelph. The importance of women in politics and in leadership roles can never be understated. I'm proud to give her my seat virtually for a day, and who knows, maybe one day she'll have a permanent seat of her own in our parliament, and I'll get to call her MP Maiorino. Now today, as you take your seats virtually in the House of Commons, you bring a wealth of bold new ideas and a desire to build a better nation for yourselves and for the generations that follow you, much like the members of Parliament who normally fill this chamber. Nous aurons besoin de ces idées et de ce dynamisme pour naviguer à travers la pire crise économique des temps modernes et pour protéger notre avenir. Family, community, and the desire to serve others has driven me since I was your age. That's why I joined the Canadian Armed Forces after high school, why I became a community volunteer during my time in the private sector, and it's why I ran to be a member of parliament to represent my community. My professional career has been enriched by serving under and working beside tremendous women leaders in uniform, in business, and now in politics. I'm in politics to defend the rights of all Canadians, regardless of their race, gender, age, background, or sexual orientation. I believe that we need more women involved in every level of Canadian politics, and that together we can overcome the challenges facing our country and secure a future for all Canadians. I'm proud to lead a party filled with incredibly strong women who continue to break glass ceilings. C'est le Parti conservateur qui a élu la première femme chef d'un parti politique, la très honorable Kim Campbell, est devenue la première femme Premier ministre du Canada. The former interim leader of our party, the Honorable Rona Ambrose, spearheaded calls to establish the International Day of the Girl, a project she still works passionately on, to help raise global awareness about the unique challenges facing girls, as well as their tremendous global potential. And our Conservative team now is filled with accomplished Canadian women, like our Deputy Leader, Candice Bergen, the Honorable Alice Wong, the first Chinese-Canadian woman to be appointed to Cabinet, MP Marilyn Gladu, the first woman to be elected to this House as a professional engineer, MP Nellie Shin, the first Korean-born Member of Parliament, and Jag Sahota, the first Sikh woman elected from Alberta. Toutes ces premières ont été possibles grâce au travail acharné, à la détermination et aux efforts des générations précédentes pour parvenir à l'égalité. Ce travail n'est jamais terminé. Partout dans le monde, près
And 1 out of 4 women between 15 and 19 years does not have the right to work or study. 1 in 3 suffer violence, physical abuse, and there is often discrimination against women and girls. We have to change.
Inspire me every day to be a better husband, dad, public servant, and Canadian. We are raising our daughter to be a strong, hardworking, and independent person. She inspires me every day with her intelligence, compassion, and drive, whether it is getting up before sun to train with her competitive swimming team, or the thoughtfulness I see in her passion for family, friends, and issues important to her. Like you, my daughter Molly will never have to fight for the right to vote or the right to attend university, but I hope, like all of you, she will go forward and help change the world. Again, thank you for having me, and enjoy your experience as a daughter of the vote.
Dans la circonscription de Papineau, dans le cadre du programme Héritière du suffrage 2021. Donc, aujourd'hui, j'ai l'honneur de vous présenter l'honorable Monsieur Justin Trudeau, Premier ministre du Canada.
Oups. Attendez. Je vais aller ici. Sorry, just Sorry about that. It wouldn't be 2020 or 2021 if there weren't technical challenges. Happy International Women's Day. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci Rebecca pour cette présentation et pour tout ton leadership, que ce soit avec l'association étudiante ou pour la lutte contre les changements.
Or for the struggle for climate change. This morning, we are reminded that women are not just leaders of tomorrow, but above all, the leaders of today.
First ever virtual sitting of the Daughters of the Vote. I know this isn't how we would normally be celebrating, but then again, change isn't always a bad thing. Just think about the fact that 100 years ago today, there wasn't a single woman in the House of Commons. It would still be almost a year until the first woman MP was elected, and almost 40 years until every woman could vote. Si les choses se sont améliorées au Canada, c'est pas par hasard. C'est arrivé parce que les femmes se sont levées.
It's not by chance, but it's because women have stood up and demanded change. Women have fought for the change in having rights and being pioneers and for being women leaders. Yesterday, they raised their voices, and today it's your turn.
But for women and young people, it's been especially hard. Of course, I don't have to tell you that. You're living it. We talk about this economic crisis as a she session, but we're not just talking about numbers and charts. We're talking about young people navigating a world that has never been more uncertain. We're talking about women losing jobs at double the rate of men and mothers doing a double shift with work and kids. L'année dernière, on a constaté une fois de plus que les temps difficiles touchent le plus durement les personnes les plus vulnérables. Trop de femmes et trop de communautés sont confrontées à l'inégalité et au racisme, y compris durant cette pandémie. Ensemble, on fait des progrès.
Make progress, but I understand why young for Indigenous, Black, or racialized women, there is still a great deal of work to do.
There's a lot that government can and should do to make sure the legacy of this pandemic isn't one of rolling back progress for women. That's exactly why we created the $5 billion Women Entrepreneurship Strategy. It's why we're working towards a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. And these efforts aren't new. For years, we've put intersectionality at the heart of all our policies with a gender-based analysis plus lens. This is incredibly important work, but it's not actually what I want to talk with you about today, because you don't need a speech from me about the solutions to this crisis. You don't need me to tell you how to change things for the better. You already know what has to come next. We need your voices and your passion guiding us forward. And not just on the recovery from this pandemic, but on fighting systemic racism, on fighting gender-based violence, on fighting climate change. We need your ideas and your drive from the boardroom to the lab to this House of Commons, because this is your place and this is your time. If you're a young woman, this is your house. If you're part of the LGBTQ2 communities, this is your house. If you are Indigenous, if you are Black, if you are a person of color, this is your house. Que vous vivez avec un handicap, que votre langue maternelle soit le français.
Disabled, whether your mother tongue is English, French, or another language, whether you're practicing or not, this parliament is yours. Last November, we reached an important phase. For the very first time, our country has 100 members of parliament. Now, it's a good thing, but let's be honest, there is a lot that remains to be. We've only had one Prime Minister of Canada, and after 50 years, it's not a very good statistic. But when we look at this virtual house and the young leaders like Rebecca, who introduced me today, I know things will change. And when they change, we're all going to take profit.
We've seen what it means to have women leading the way through a crisis. Look no further than the first women finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, and Minister Qualtrough, who are making sure that families have the support they need. Or take Minister Monsef, who's worked tirelessly with women's shelters and grassroots organizations. We're all better off when women are at the decision-making table. From Minister Haidu and Minister Anand, who are leading on public health measures and vaccines, to every woman and girl who has stepped up for her community. We are all stronger for the leadership of women and people of every gender identity. After this year, there's no doubt. When you add women, you change politics, and you change it for the better. Tout au long de notre histoire, on a pu réaliser des...
We've been able to carry out progress when women have had their voices heard. And today, we need to fight for a stronger and more equitable country, and it's your turn to act. This moment belongs to you. You're going to go into history, and we will be on your side throughout the process. Thank you, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister, and to all the leaders for speaking with us today. That brings us to the end of our virtual House of Commons program this morning. Thank you to all of our speakers and distinguished guests, and happy International Women's Day to all.